Welcome to the show we like to call For the Love of Real Estate, where we dive into what it means to buy or sell a home in today's world. Join host Jill Elliott, Dallas broker associate and former radio personality, as she marries her two loves, radio and real estate. She's going to have you asking yourself, for the love of real estate, should I tackle my fears and buy, rent, sell, or remodel?
Hello and welcome to For the Love of Real Estate. Please take a minute to show some love and subscribe if you haven't already. You know, this show is about all aspects of real estate as seen through the eyes of cool people that I've met along the way, which is why I'm so happy to have this particular guest on. So picture this sweet little cul-de-sac of homes. They're brand new, all being built, lots of trees. It's off a busy highway called I-20 and busy thoroughfare called Washington Road. That leads you to the Augusta National Golf Course. You may have heard of it. And downtown Augusta, Georgia. Now, I bought one of these homes with my husband at the time, another story for another day. And I had my first real job in radio, morning show host at Kicks 99. So life was great. And up the street was this beautiful couple. The girl was a tall redhead with a rockin' bod, and her husband could not have been any more adorable. Their house looked like something out of a magazine. And I also remember her husband made the curtains in their living room, and I was so jealous. Like, Brett drove a Harley and made curtains. In my mind, life was good for you, sister. So welcome, Winton Swanson, to the show.
Jill, I'm so happy that you are having me on here. And that was a long time ago. That was
31 years, I think.
5 years ago.
31.
Wow.
31. Yeah,
well, I've been married almost 30. So.
Right. Yeah, something like that.
We moved in when we'd been married 29 years.
Whoa.
But thank you. I wish I still had that hot bod, but, time happens, right?
It sure
Brett
does.
ages backwards.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that nice? Yes, definitely. You were my first neighbor and you were like my first friend. And we were navigating through the first time home buyer sort of thing. Remember that?
Yes.
How long ago that was.
Yes.
But that was such an interesting time. And I deal with that every day in my life. And one of the things I have to let you guys know is that Wynton also has her own wonderful podcast. And it's called Not What I Signed Up For. And what I loved about your podcast and listening to it, first of all, you're as real as it gets, which I've always known about you. But I lived everything with you. So it was so odd to hear all of this stuff that you're talking about. And then what happens? I'm like, I was there. And you know what, Wynton? I had no idea. I had no idea some of the things that you were going through due to real estate, that's why I have you on the show.
Oh, that's really cool.
So
all these years later.
I know. And so I think I was listening to a show and you and your husband, Brett, you had him in the hot seat show, and you were talking about building a house. Yeah, and so what happened was you built a house, and that's where I met you. You had a nice, cute little house that was just adorable, and then you guys were building another one. But that particular point in your life, which I thought was perfect, was not so much in the process. And what I kind of wanted you to share is a little bit of your insight on when you're going through it, because so many times people go through these things when they're having a real estate transaction or building a house, and they feel like everything is coming down on them, and they get frustrated, and it gets very emotional. And you got through it, and I was just kind of wondering how in the world, because I had no idea that here you were building a house, and you basically said you guys had no business doing that.
Correct. I think there comes a point in everybody's life, I don't think we were different, that your friends are moving on, buying bigger homes, your family's growing, and you see everybody moving on to that next stage. And we were not quite ready for that next stage. So we put the horse before the cart. And it was very, very stressful. But I know we learned a lot from that season. And we always say we were keeping up with the Joneses, and if you've never heard this, the Joneses are broke and getting a divorce, and we found ourselves in that exact position. We built this house that we had no business building, and we were asking for shrubs and garage door openers for Christmas, and we had raw sheetrock, and we had trim that was not painted and no shrubs. And we found ourselves very stressed.
But you know what is funny about that time is there was no social media. So my thinking is this: if there was social media, you guys probably would have put the picture of you guys where there was that one shrub, and you had sheetrock, right? So like that's what you would have shown to the world. Am I not mistaken?
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and you would have shown the perfect part, and then Me too. Are you just not thankful there wasn't social media back then, or what?
I would have cringed. I think, like you said, you thought we were this perfect family from the outside looking in. We looked perfect, but we were drowning in debt because of the house. And I actually, you said the name of my podcast was not what I signed up for. And I said to my husband, this is not what I signed up for. I signed up for the perfect house that was finished with the white picket fence, with the landscaping that's perfect, with my children that looked completely manicured, and this perfect marriage. But that was the opposite of what it was. And we found ourselves not getting along. We were bickering. We couldn't come into an agreement about anything. And it was a nightmare.
Well, and something else I remember is you mentioned a Walton Way house. And that's sort of what drove you to do your own podcast, because you were a child of divorce. I have a child of divorce. But you came through it, as I say, put your 2 feet on the floor. You're no different than anyone else. But I know that's hard for them to believe. And here you were, a little girl in Augusta, Georgia, walking past this certain house on Walton Way. And if anybody knows anything about Augusta, Walton Way is the street, right? But tell me about that house and how it affected your, kind of like your whole life, really.
Well, I would walk to school and I would look at this house, and it had a wood-sided station wagon, which back in the day, that's what you wanted to drive.
Oh, that was cool.
And
girl.
I was like, I'm going to drive the wood-sided station wagon. I'm going to have 4 children. I am going to be a member of the country club, and I'm just going to have this perfect family, and we're going to live in this perfect house with this brick, dormer windows, picket fence, and I'm going to create this perfect life for my family so that my family and my children would have what I didn't have growing up. And so you create this ideal of what your life is supposed to be like. And then when it doesn't happen, you have this expectation of what it's supposed to be. So when it doesn't happen, you are so disappointed, and you start blaming everything else and everybody else. I call it the victim mentality. I think we can all relate to that at some point. But so I started blaming my husband. If you hadn't have wanted this big house, I wanted it too, but I knew the timing probably wasn't right. If it hadn't have been this big, when really, I just needed to focus on, okay, what's wrong with the big picture here? Let's take a step back. And we had to create some order in the chaos. And that didn't happen right away, but I had to realize it wasn't going to be this house that was going to make my family perfect. It was going to be showing up for the way I needed to show up for my family. And
I see that. Yes. You said order, right? And so what that means is that sometimes people get so caught up in, but we have to find the perfect house. And sometimes I want to say, but you don't, because in this market, it's so crazy. So let me just kind of paint it for you. So let's just say you're going to bid 20, some people go over 20 grand over, right? Let's just use that as our number. But there's another house that you could probably get that doesn't have all those offers on it, but maybe it doesn't have granite and it doesn't have the perfect paint, and it needs a little something. Why not take that 20 grand that you have laying around and put it on that house instead of giving it to someone else? Yeah,
that's a really good point, Jill, because what I was going to say was I didn't want to build the first little house where you and I met in the cul-de-sac. I wanted to buy in this other neighborhood. Well, I wanted an older house in this other neighborhood, which is where the people that grew up in Augusta lived. But think about that. I know. Think about had I not have lived there, I wouldn't have met you.
Oh gosh, and how horrible would that have been?
Horrible.
Well, it would have for me, because when I tell people about so I had this guy, and he he was splitting up, and he said, well, I should sell this house, it's too big. And one thing I remembered about him is as he moved on is he loved his neighbors. And I said, I can find another house for you. I don't know if I can find new neighbors. And that is what I think made that little cul-de-sac so special, is because you have helped me throughout my life being my neighbor, but you have helped me on so many levels. You and I have had talks about our kids, because you have a son and I have a son, and they were just two different, animals out there, right? Like they weren't, they didn't like school. Wasn't that they were bad students. It just wasn't their cup of tea. And now they're doing what they want to do because they're over 18. But my point is, I have luckily been able to keep in touch with you, and you've always just given me strength. You've made me, make sure I'm keeping my faith in check. And over these, 20, 30 years, whatever it's been, these are the things that I think why real estate can unite people. It can also not unite people, but it can. And that's what I just kind of wanted this show to be a little bit about, is how it unites people, and how it, hopefully people will go, you know what? We don't need that extra room on the house. We really can't afford it. So let's build this. Or let's not worry about the Joneses, who aren't even together anymore. I can write a book on that. But what I'm saying is, don't do it for yourself and what your family needs, and not what it's supposed to look like when you have people over. That it's going to look like something out of a Pottery Barn, or the Chip and Joanna special. Those kinds of things, because they don't show all the rooms, by the way, just so you know.
Right.
They don't,
Jill. So it's just a house. It is just a house. It's what you
I don't know.
Make it out.
Yeah.
And what I mean is what you bring into the house is what makes it a home. Exactly. So you have to, you have to think, okay, that's how I think about it. Like that house was my dream home, but it was just a house. Mm-hmm. And we've actually built that house since then again. And it is a home because we built it 15 years later when we were able to afford it and create. But the other one was just a house that created a mess. This one has been a home because it was when we were supposed to do it. So I guess what I mean is it's just a house. Don't get so caught up, oh, this is the perfect house. This is the perfect house. Well, the next house that you're saying you could save $20,000 and put it in that, and it might be the best home and the best house you can imagine. So don't get so bogged down on the perfect house. Does that make any sense?
It sure does to me, because I do this every day, and that's why I wanted you on, is because you've had the same things happen to you that I've tried to help people with, and a lot of them have done that and stuff, and and I don't mean stretching the budget just a little bit. I mean the 100K over and those kinds of things, because I remember visiting you at that house during the process, and I was just so happy. But you gave me a look. I see it. It was like, girl. I was like, oh my God, I'm so happy for you. And you were like, yeah. And you went, girl. And I knew we still had more to talk about, but I didn't get a chance to do it. But I knew that there was something. And now I know what it was 30 years later. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yes. I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about. It's just a house. So when we moved to Greenville, South Carolina 16 years ago, I was actually going through cancer treatment. And I just told Brett, he wanted to build. And I said, I can't build right now. I don't know if I'm going to have chemo. I just need a home. Well, we wanted to be in a particular neighborhood. That was very important for us. And there were just a few houses for sale. And we bought this house that we didn't love. Now, it was a beautiful home, but the floor plan was just not really what was conducive for our lifestyle. And I don't want to say we settled on it, but we did. It was a beautiful home. And, I just kept saying, I don't need our dream house right now. I just need a home. And that's what I'm saying. It's it's four walls, it's a building, but it's the people in it that create the home. And we lived there for 9 years. We raised our children there, and it wasn't until after Rebecca graduated that we moved and we built this house. And I loved that house because of the memories I created. And I have to go back and tell you, Jill, I've only ever experienced this one time, but when you moved away and I would look up at your house, I would be so sad. I had this new little baby, and Jill was my buddy, and I didn't see her pulling in or yelling down the street. And I just remember how sad I was. And that was the first time I'd ever had a friend and a neighbor move away from me. And so those connections are real when you find those precious neighbors.
Yeah, they really are. And I remember you guys used to call because I had leased it because I couldn't sell it. And you guys would call and say, they're parking their, some of the other neighbors too, they're parking their trucks in the front yard, and they took down the lamplight and they stop. But the crazy thing was, remember that? Y'all were telling me, thanks, Jill, you just ruined the neighborhood. And I'm like, oh my gosh, because I could not sell it. But then I moved back into that house, and you had already moved, and that's when I came and saw you at the new house.
Jill, I forgot all about that.
I know. It's amazing. Like listening to your podcast just brought up so many memories and so many things that I think from your podcast, between yours and mine, I think people can, you have to just breathe. You have to calm down. You have to really look at your situation. And that's sometimes what I tell people. Now the market is so crazy, it might not be a good time for people to buy. It just might not, but you have to see what it works for you. But if it is, and hey, I've got to be out of this place, or I've got to move, or I've got to, go across the country or something, then it is time. I always say you need to be ready for real estate, then real estate will be ready for you. It always just, you have to look at the whole picture, and it's so hard because it's so exciting. Everybody thinks it's like HGTV, and it's not. It's much more difficult and convoluted than that, because nothing, easy about it, but it's worth it. That's what I keep trying to tell people on the old crazy side. It's worth it because now you do have a house and you knew how to make it a home. Whereas before it was a different, I guess the wrong reasons maybe. Is that what I'm trying to say?
Yes, you're right. You're right. We bit off more than we could chew when we had the rest of our lives.
And also through your podcast, you are an amazing decorator. You really are you have no idea. And you also paint, and you're one of those cool people, right? That I'm not. But you saw a house, and this is from one of your podcasts, that you thought was so perfect, and you ended up going to this house. Do you remember that podcast you did? And you went for like a Bible study or something.
Keep talking. Oh,
and
yes.
And so you couldn't believe that you saw this house somewhere, and then you got the opportunity to go there and do a Bible study.
Correct.
And so how did you feel about that house? And it was everything that came along with it.
Yes, I remember I wanted to meet the lady because it was just, she'd really made this house a home. And I thought, I want to meet this lady. And then I was invited to her house for a Bible study. And she's one of my best friends. She's 10 years older. She's been a great mentor to me. And she was the one that really shared a lot with me about what I learned, that your house doesn't define who you are. It's doesn't mean you're a better person because you live in this house or a less person because you live in that. It's and I just think that she really opened my eyes to, why were we in that house? Why had we gotten ourselves in that situation? And I think we were very humbled, and it was a great learning experience for us. And I mentor a lot of young ladies, and we've been able to share, and my husband's very good with finances, and surprisingly he is. We just bit off more than we could chew that time.
Well, but you were young, and see, that's just it. So many times people, what I've noticed with the younger crowd is because they have text messages and all these things it's instant gratification. And it's almost like some people go, oh, I can't live without granite countertops. I'm like, oh yeah, you really can. I promise you can. And then you can pick out what you want someday and do little projects and things like that.
So, Jill, when I built that house, when you were my neighbor, I had the Waverly Ivy wallpaper in my kitchen and the green Formica that looked like marble. And it was, I thought I had arrived. Well, then, fast forward, the house I was telling you about that we didn't love, that we moved into, it had tile countertops just like that green, but they were tile. We lived in that house for 9 years and did not redo the kitchen because we never knew if we were going to stay there. We talked about it 100 times. And do you know, I didn't even care. it didn't even bother me because I was in such a different place with who I was and I didn't feel like I needed to apologize for my green countertops.
Right.
The house was decorated beautifully. It was beautiful. And do you know we redid the kitchen to sell it?
Oh gosh.
There you go.
But at the time you had to. But and that's kind of what's crept up on us. There was a time when you could sell, bad carpet and all. You know what I mean? Like you could. It didn't matter. But now it does. Everything is different. Disclosures, things like that. Houses going for at this point in time over list and stuff. But the bottom line is what you said. It's like if you're just doing this and then you don't make it a home, it's not going to help you. If all of a sudden you get in the house and realize, oh, I got in it because so-and-so bought a house. Same thing when everybody's getting married or everybody's having kids. Oh, I'm going to do it for that reason. It's not usually comes out the way that you think it should.
Right. Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with having a nice, big, beautiful house. But there's a timing for that. And if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. It doesn't mean you're less of a person. And I can promise you, when you do get in that house that you can't afford, you're going to be looking at other people that live way less than you do and think, oh, God, I just wish I could live in that small house and have my bills paid. Because I'm telling you, there's something to that security.
Absolutely.
And then you don't care about the big house.
All of a sudden, you're centering yourself. I don't know if you meditate or not, has helped me because, I'm kind of like, but when I center myself and I think, okay, how should this situation be? Then that helps me. Or just talking through it. I like it when I have the clients that will talk it through with me. Each house we go to, it's like, yeah, well, we have this. We'll sit down and we'll kind of like be in the living room for a few minutes. Hard to do it now. We only have like 30. They get you in and out of there so quick. But I have them compartmentalized. Right. Don't think about the other houses. What about this? What about the HOA fees? What about you have to be in this country club? And, will you like that? That all of these things come into play. It's everything around it as well. But again, home ownership also, I think, has a way of centering you if you do it for the right reasons. A funny story about your husband and you that I remember that helped me throughout my life is when my son was in the 5th grade, okay? And a teacher looked at him, not one of my favorite ones, but looked at him and wasn't his regular teacher and said, hey, you need to start working harder or whatever because you're going to end up flipping burgers at McDonald's for the rest of your life. And I thought about that when he got home and told me, and I said, let me tell you a little story about my friend Winton Swanson. She would walk into we would go places, you and I. Remember this? Probably not, but you would go places and you always looked adorable, cute, nice, and people would go, oh my gosh. One day I remember somebody asked you what your husband did, and you said, he works at McDonald's. And they looked at you.
I did.
Like you had 3 heads, like, oh, okay.
The whole scenario
whatever.
Would change, yes.
And the whole scenario changed in that Brett owned McDonald's someday later on in his life. Am I not mistaken? Chick-fil-A's, McDonald's, what is it? Anything?
Well, yes. Yes. And then he moved on. We moved on to chicken. Yes.
Right. But my point is that if you start flipping burgers at McDonald's, you can own it. If you start
People
in
don't
a job.
Realize that.
Yeah, that was my point in that you don't stay there. You move on. And there's nothing wrong. It was like job shaming or something. And it really upset me that someone would say that to my son because maybe he wanted to own a McDonald's someday. I don't know. You see what I mean? So I love that, that story carried into this life. And that gave him an incentive to go, you know what? I guarantee you if I said, I bet if you worked at McDonald's, you're going to own it one day. He's like, yeah, exactly. So it was a very teachable moment from my former neighbor.
Yes.
See?
Some of our friends over the years thank you, Jill. I appreciate that. Some of our friends over the years have lost their jobs. And Brett, they're without a job for a couple of years. And Brett always says, look, 2 places I would tell you to go if you can't find a job. Walmart or McDonald's. Why? Because you are going to shine, and in 3 weeks, you're going to be a manager. And something is better than nothing. But not everybody can do that. And because my husband flipped burgers and would come home, and I was like, again, this is not what I signed up for. You're working long hours and not making any money. And he told me one time, just pretend I'm doing a surgery residency. I know I'm flipping burgers, but it will pay off one day. And he had that vision that I didn't have. I was stuck in the here and now, and I want my big house. I want my nice car. And it was all about that, which just about did us in. And I'm thankful that it didn't. We worked through it, but it was hard. I mean, there was a time I was going to leave, and I talk about that in my podcast, but I didn't. And now, next month will be 30 years in, and I'm so thankful that I stayed because, you know, when you as a realtor, Jill, being with somebody, that's one of the biggest purchases a family is going to make, and that can be very stressful. And
Absolutely.
I'm sure, you know, there are many scenarios that can bring stress into a family. And, you know, life is not easy all the time. Even if it looks great on the outside, oftentimes they're the ones that don't have it all together.
Exactly. And just knowing that it's okay to take a step back. And I tell people that a lot, you know, especially when people call me and say, I have to sell my house because of this. And like just what I did with that other guy, I said, don't sell it, not right now. Sometimes you have to be still and look around. And that's the realtor talking here. I should be going, yeah, I'll see you on Thursday at 2:00. But I don't, because I feel like I want to know my clients, you know, and not like have them go, wait a minute, you told me to sell this house. I want them to think about it. I want them to give it some thought. And why are you moving? What is the reason? And not just because of this thing, right? But maybe this thing is why. So that's a different story. But there's so much in life that we learn later, unfortunately. And that's why us old people have to, you know, tell the young people that look at us like, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, oh, I see things now that I feel like it's some kind of epiphany or something, you know, that just, you know, the sky's part. And I'm so thankful that I see it now, but I didn't see it back then. Maybe it was a little bit of a protection mode, but I'll tell you what, when I did move out of that house I lived at in Georgia in Alpharetta, when I moved out, it was hard because I saw my whole life flash in front of my face. But I think I more miss the camaraderie of my friends. But luckily, that changes too, because now I have that. But I still am so thankful for every single friend and person I met along the way. In Augusta, Georgia, and all the Atlanta, all the different places that I've lived, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, New Orleans, everything has just kind of all come full circle. And that was kind of the point I want to make in real estate is sometimes we make decisions, but you can fix it. You can change it. You know, maybe you bought a house that's not so great. Give it some time. You may actually like it. You may meet some of the best people you've ever met in your life. Kind of like that.
Right.
And
right.
The little neighborhood we lived in Augusta, that was Ray's Creek that went behind it, didn't it?
Yes.
My house? Somebody told me that.
Correct.
Yeah, and if you follow that, it'd take you to the Augusta National.
Yes, it would.
Do you remember that?
We
Isn't
used
that
to
crazy?
rent. Yes. And we used to rent our house for the Masters, and that was
I
a
remember
nightmare
that.
getting ready for that. Ugh.
Well, I know, but you rented it to a golfer one year. I remember because I always had to stay in town because we did our show from the Masters, from the National.
That's right.
Yeah, so I always had to stay in town. You could leave because you had your family there, but I had to stay. So I always got to like have all these crazy people around, and it was just like, but God, that was the best time. That was the best week ever. And now, but that was when any yoo-hoo with $20 could get in for practice rounds and par 3 day, which they don't even do anymore. Yeah, but oh my gosh, Wynton, this has been so much fun. I hope you'll come
Jill,
back.
thank you so much.
And I hope this podcast helped you in some way, shape, or form. Please take a moment, show some love, and subscribe, or visit my website, JillElliottHomes.com.
Thank you for tuning into For the Love of Real Estate. If you enjoyed today's show, head over to fortheloveofrealestate.biz to join the conversation, access the show notes, and sign up for our newsletter.